So for those who aren't in the know, this week I am here with Daniel Pinchbeck, one of my favorite authors. Definitely changed my life in college. His first book, Breaking Open the Head, that came out in 2002. I don't think I got my hands on it till like maybe 2004. No, yeah, maybe like no, not 2004. Maybe like 2005. Which was super fascinating, and it really helped me to kind of break open a lot of stuff within me, and the journey has really continued. And with that being said, have you heard of these?
Oh, mind trips. What is that? Nope.
Oh, oh, it's a chocolate treat. It's a chocolate treat I'm gonna try right now. Let's see how interesting this interview will get. I feel like this would be the only interview that I would have that would kind of like merit just a slight. I'll give you a piece through the camera.
Is it psilocybin or what is it?
Yeah, of course.
No,
What do you
cool,
think?
right on. Cool.
Right. Shout out to Jedi Mind Trips. I figure like, hey, like you were definitely one of the figures that helped me to move along in my psychedelic journey. So I'm more than happy to be able to share that. Daniel also has a really great YouTube with a lot of resources, including a really, really old but really awesome interview with Joe Rogan. Definitely have to put that out there since like you were like one of the OG guests, and Joe has just really just. Have you been back on?
Nope.
No. Do you want to go back on?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
Actually, just the last few days, I feel like I know. I mean, so my main focus recently has been my Substack. I have a
Yeah.
newsletter, danielpinchbeck.substack.com. And also, I do courses at liminal.news. So we just did a course called The Future of Consciousness. And then I got about a month and a half ago, or 2 months ago, I got very involved with the sort of thinking about the election and concerned about what a Trump victory would mean for the future of the U.S., which I still am very concerned about. Yeah, and just the last few days, I feel like a book idea is beginning to crystallize. So I'm excited about that. Yeah.
Yes. Book ideas crystallizing. So the cool thing about this guest, and probably many guests, probably like half, just because I try to collect as many people as possible. I've actually met Daniel in person. I kind of tracked him down randomly in Tulum a couple of years ago during the pandemic. I think you were doing something on Aleister Crowley, like on the beach at some type of like talk. And, just the intersection of shamanism, psychedelics, occult, like I was like, oh my God, I have to go. So I was really excited to meet him. And with most artists and just change makers that have been helpful for me, like I forced them to eat some of my food. So I prepared a really cool meal and popped over and got to hang. So I'm so happy that we were able to meet in the flesh and you tried the food, which I won't be making anything today. I just got back last night from Thanksgiving. So my fridge is empty. No prep today. And the only thing we're eating today are these Jedi mind trips. Anywho, moving on. Yeah, let's hop right into it. Psychedelics. So why? Like, what were the things that kind of pushed you to that? And a lot of times, like I like to ask people, what were like those seeds, things that happened when you were like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, to where maybe it didn't really pop into something until later on. But when you look back, because hindsight is 2020, they were like, wow, it was kind of there all along.
Hmm. Well, yeah, but I guess a formative experience for me was actually spending like 8 or 9 months in a hospital when I was like between 11 and 12, I would say. I had like a
Okay, that's deep.
infection in my spine and I was in a body cast and so on. So, yeah, I mean, so I guess sense of like the fragility of life or the presence of death. Um, Also kind of I feel like I had to stretch my mind in a way to like, because most people when they're in an uncomfortable situation, even like, an uncomfortable thought, they'll try to veer away from it as fast as possible. But I think having that experience gave me more capacity to kind of linger in uncomfortable psychic situations or
Mm.
intellectual, mental, cognitive, and be like kind of like, okay, like, this is weird, this is like unclear, like how can we think about this in a helpful way?
Mm.
So yeah, I was in my 20s, and I tried psychedelics in college a few times and found them really interesting. Then I left college and I was working in magazines and writing, and I was an editor. And I began to have this sort of existential despair because it was New York City in like the late 90s, and everybody I knew was like in the media and writing novels, but everybody was a, kind of a atheist, materialist. And I think underlying that was a
Mm.
lot of like grief and kind of nihilism, because if you really believe that consciousness is completely embedded in the brain, and therefore after we die everything is just annihilated, then in a way life is really quite meaningless on some kind of meta level, right? So it's like whatever you do, you can have a great time in your kitchen, we can have a great time in Tulum, but ultimately we're going to die and it's going to be totally annihilated, and there's not going to even be any, other things will continue, but our spirits, our souls don't exist in any form after that. So I began to wonder. I don't know why I even had that, because my friends didn't have that kind of questioning. But for me, I became more and more kind of, I just was asking myself, do I know for a fact that this is it? I mean, all my teachers and my friends and my parents were all skeptics and materialists in that sense. But yeah, so I was like, then I remembered my psychedelic experiences in college, which were the closest things I'd ever had to like transcendent or visionary or mystical kind of experience. And it seemed like very powerful and revealing. So then I was a journalist, so I started to get assignments. And I learned about ayahuasca. This was like 99 or something. I learned about iboga, which was a psychedelic plant in West Africa. I ended up going to Gabon and going through the initiation with iboga, which is now being used as a treatment for addictions, particularly for heroin.
Yep.
There's some clinics that are doing really well with it in Mexico and so on. Yeah, so I started researching, and then I did have a number of experiences that I wrote about in detail in the book that cumulatively changed my perspective from kind of a scientific materialism, skepticism, to kind of accepting that, yeah, there were bigger mysteries in the cosmos, and that actually there was a sort of realm of the psyche, and there was telepathy and psychic phenomena and the supernatural and the occult, and everything just kept opening up like accordions, like an infinite accordion of fascinating topics. I tried DMT and was catapulted into a total immersive other dimensional reality that seemed to have all these like beings there. Mushrooms in Mexico. I had a big mushroom dose where I actually encountered little green elves in a vision who were waving and laughing at me. It was just like one thing
I
after
remember
another.
that, the elf machine.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, so I published that book, and it was a moderate success. And then while writing that book, I'd learned about people like Terence McKenna. There was another visionary, Jose Arguelles, and they'd also been sort of like psychedelic thinkers in the 70s and 80s, and they had begun to connect kind of psychedelics to these prophecies that the Mayans had about the nature of time and the calendar. And this led me to a second book, 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, which was actually a bestseller in like 2008. I was on the Colbert Report, and the Rolling Stone did a big feature on me. And it was kind of interesting, because looking back, I really had like the psychedelic field to myself at that point. Like,
Yeah.
nobody else was really writing about it or talking about it. And, really like people in America, in the East Coast anyway, were completely dismissive and would mock you if you talked about psychedelics as something of interest or valuable. It's like the whole cultural tonality had become so incredibly negative. So it's been very interesting to see over the last 15, 20 years, I guess, that that the whole cultural shift towards accepting these psychedelics is interesting. All the research now, all these big academic departments and like Harvard and Johns Hopkins have started, and Berkeley. For some reason, nobody ever invites me to speak at any of them. I don't know why, but I think also because what
The
basically
pioneer always gets the arrows in his back, right?
exactly that. Thank you. That's
Mm.
Lynette. I appreciate it. That's been the story of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also because like the for me, I became more and more interested in the sort of Jungian, mystical, transpersonal aspects of it, and kind of the way that psychedelics were kind of formatted for their acceptance into the mainstream was to just look at them from a scientific perspective and a completely empirical, evidence-based perspective. Like, what do they do for OCD or end of life anxiety, or what do they do for depression and so on. So so that's actually my recent essays on my newsletter have been all about kind of thinking about where the psychedelic movement has landed, and why I think it's actually problematic, and why in a way it's actually ended up supporting kind of Trumpism in a way, in that it's I think made a lot of people kind of like more destabilized in terms of how they think about things, and more
Like
impulsive.
escapism?
Yeah, escapism, or just like, when you have certain psychedelic experiences are so powerful, and you might feel that the whole universe is this web of conspiracies that's, organized in certain ways. There's like hidden powers that might make you more susceptible to ideas around QAnon, or, weather manipulation, or all these weird things that I never thought in a million years people would believe in my social circles, which have now become taken root. People who are kind of like psychic or sensitive, or shamanic or whatever. A lot of them have seemed to have gone into this very strange belief system.
That's really interesting. What's funny, I want to go back a little bit to like your book, and I have to say that one of the things that I thought was really, really, really interesting was the iboga, and how that has slowly become something for people to be able to help themselves off of, quote, hard drugs, which is interesting because psychedelics is, demonized so much. Like sometimes I'll mention psilocybin to someone and then they'll say, yeah, I don't do hard drugs like that. Or they'll call it a narcotic. Or they'll call it these things where it's just like, okay, wait a second. You don't really have a big understanding of what's going on. And what's interesting is that iboga, I feel like, is it could be such a big use in the United States with substance abuse. It's like just a big thing. And I think that between that and, for example, psilocybin, like, and I think iboga, it's not really recreational. You know what I mean? And I think that in the same way, like, which is not a psychedelic, but combo, I do quite a bit of combo, and I feel like that's along the same lines. Have you ever worked with combo at all?
I did it once, and I had a feeling before that it really wasn't for me, like my thing.
Uh-oh.
And I sort of feel like combo works best if you're more what the Ayurvedic kind of body types, or whatever. There's like
Okay.
kapha, pitta, and vata or
You did.
something.
Mhm,
I think
mhm.
it's really strong for people who have a lot of fire in their constitution.
Mm.
But yeah, for me, I didn't really take to it.
You
I
didn't
didn't feel
rock with it
drawn
too
to it.
much. It wasn't really for you. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's I think that's the only one in that kind of section, so to speak, that I definitely use just for the cellular, scientific, immunity, all of those types of aspects of it. So it's definitely not for me like a trip. It's more so like, wow, okay. So the first time I did it was in Mexico, and I had a form of dengue, which was called chikungunya. And I was coming back from Tulum, came back, and my old roommate from Mexico City, he's a practicing shaman, and he says, okay, we're doing a combo circle, and I think this will probably help you. And I did it. And by the time I got back home, I was living off the coast of Oaxaca at the time. Everyone else had gone through this second wave of this like dengue chikungunya thing, and it didn't touch me. So from there, like I kind of consistently have gotten it over the past almost like 10 years. And yeah, that's definitely different than me going up to San Jose del Pacifico, and doing a couple of rounds of psilocybin. It's definitely two different things. It's just the feeling, and then just like the head part. So I remember that your first trip was during a tornado, psilocybin.
Oh, I think it was a rainstorm, maybe a mild hurricane in
Okay.
that's a good memory. I was in
Yeah.
college, and it was my second trip. I took mushrooms,
Okay.
and yeah, it was very beautiful actually being out and feeling the power of nature, and the wind and the rain whipping through the trees. And yeah, I mean, very strong impression from those early experiences was like, um, how like we lived in a society of abstractions,
Yeah.
human made ideas and abstractions, and we'd imposed these abstractions onto the planet. So like our buildings are like these square concrete glass things and so on, but then nature is like has so much more kind of wisdom and sort of tensile capacity. It almost felt like nature was just laughing at us almost. For our,
I
and
believe that.
everybody I looked at was like seemed so lost. Like they were watching like sports in a bar, or they were like reading, about Wall Street and newspaper. They were completely not connected to the present moment.
Okay, yeah.
They were, kind of absorbed in, narratives, abstractions, and so on. And yeah, so and then also, yeah, a big realization around money. I remember going to a deli to buy something while I was tripping on mushrooms, and like how just ridiculous these like brown, ugly pieces of paper were, and how like I couldn't believe that our civilization put so much focus on accumulating this stuff.
Yeah, it means
Um,
it's so meaningless. Like you just like get it all away. So it's funny because after I read your book and my boyfriend at the time, we lived together, and I don't think he read it. Actually, he might have read it. He might still have it. Who knows? But we were like, all right, we're going to take a trip. It was my first trip, and it was in an apartment on like the third floor in New York City, which is absolutely not the best place to kick off your psilocybin journey. And it was interesting because the way that you went into the bodega is the same way I kind of like hit this moment where I just started to crave nature, and I started to kind of crave that kind of section, and I had like a mini meltdown. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. This is terrible. He's like, what's wrong? I'm like, I need to get down to the dirt. I need to get down to the land. I need to get down. And I said, but if I go outside right now and I start digging into the ground, I'm going to dig into the 4 train. I'm going to dig into the 6 train underground. And that idea of just the modern versus just the ancient and not being able to just get down. I wanted to kind of get as deep as the medicine, so to speak, was getting into me. And so I ended up locking myself in the bathroom and filling up the bathtub with lukewarm water. Normally I take like hot baths or I'm going to do an ice bath, one or the other, right? But the temperature of the water was almost like kind of like a natural body temperature. Turned off the lights, got in the bathtub, and obviously you have very little sense of time, with this. And who knows how long I was in there, but I was searching for like a version of nature. And I realized that in that bathtub that for whatever reason, I had decided that I wanted to get back to the womb. If I couldn't get downstairs and into the earth, now I'm getting back in the womb. And I think that's why the temperature of the water was kind of like body temperature. It's like I would have never, never, ever taken a bath like that. Tepid. Yeah, it was tepid. That's exactly the word for it. And who knows how long that lasts, but definitely suggest to folks out there, try to make your first trip definitely not in the city. I mean, you can, but it's something like that. I feel like coming so far from nature,
yeah.
so close to nature, you don't necessarily want to be in a modern thing. I don't know. What do you think as far as just in general, even if you have done tons of trips, what's the idea of doing shrooms in Tokyo or in Times Square in the middle of just these things?
I mean, I think I have a weird perspective, but I have like different, maybe even contrasting views at this point. Because
Okay.
if you read my recent essays, I'm more thinking about this idea that maybe all the psychedelic use that everyone's been doing over the last 15 years, or maybe even since the 60s, has actually had cumulatively kind of a negative effect on a very subtle level. This is from a cultural critic and mystic who I really appreciated, who passed away a few years ago, William Owen Thompson, who said that all the kind of unprotected use of psychedelics outside of like protected shamanic lineages was actually leading to an erosion of the boundary between the physical and the psychic, and it was allowing kind of like entities and energies from the astral worlds to begin to kind of leak more into the material world, including like sort of
Mm.
ambiguous entities and demons and all that kind of stuff. So I'm a little bit right now. I'm a little bit playing with that idea, or feeling like there's something to that. But I actually, to be honest with you, when I got back into psychedelics in my 20s, and I was living in New York City. I mean, I grew up in Manhattan. So like this is my island. I'm like an
Right.
Eskimo from Manhattan. So to me, this is nature. And I actually
Yeah.
used to love taking psychedelics and even going out to like a dive bar like Max Fish on Ludlow Street, and
Oh my
suddenly
gosh, Max Fish.
all the people in the bar were like these medieval barbarians. The women were like medieval harlots, the men were like wounded knights, and kind of vagabonds and so on. So I don't know. It
I've
gave
done it.
everything this kind of mythical quality, or archetypal quality dimension to experience. That at
Yeah,
that
you can
time
see
I found
everything.
really amazing. Now I would not do that. Would I do that? I don't think I would do that because yeah, maybe I would. But I
Never
also used to
seen it.
love going to museums on LSD, like the Metropolitan Museum or on mushrooms, or the Rubin Museum, where you visit all the
Yeah,
Tibetan kind of like sculptures, and each one is like something you really feel, because they're all ideas that they've actually, like, the god kind of incarnates in those statues. And when you're on psychedelics, maybe you're more attuned to that sort of energetic of that. So yeah, so I mean, I guess both and, but nature is also obviously incredibly wonderful way to do psychedelics. And for
yeah,
most people, definitely to be preferred. You know.
yeah, for sure. So, are you thinking now, like, you're having a thought where, kind of in the same way that a shaman, facilitator, what have you, they need to be vetted and trained to be able to share this medicine and be able to hold space. But on the other end of the spectrum, you're thinking that everyone that's actually partaking, there has been a loss of like being vetted to being able to receive. It's just a little bit too easy to be able to just do it and kind of pull it. Because I know you mentioned something, I don't know what writing this was. It was about like marijuana being like a spiritual entity, and that it should be more for like ritualistic use. Like, is that what you're kind of thinking about?
Yes, yeah, that was from a very interesting essay that we published years ago in the web magazine we had, Reality Sandwich, where this guy who never smoked marijuana before, but was kind of a psychic, smoked
Mm.
marijuana, and then he visited the spirit of marijuana on the astral plane, and
Oh,
found that it was like there were these like green kind of like Nomi characters who were like taking care. I don't know why we're getting all this like esoteric stuff right now, but anyway, all these beings were taking care of it, and they were saying that because we were misusing it so much, they could just come in and like steal willpower and IQ and so on from us and use it for themselves, like little energy batteries. And they were laughing at us for being so stupid. And they were like, yeah, like it used to be that, like somebody would smoke marijuana and they would use it to a very specific like ritual purpose, or project their consciousness to meet another shaman. I mean, it is a very powerful tool. Yeah. So we're yeah, in this vision this guy had. And I'm not, I like to play with certain ideas. I mean, I try to be very careful when I feel like I've definitely had an experience. And I can say like that, was as real for me as, this table or whatever, or this mic.
right.
But other things, it's like a playing with concepts or ideas. But yeah, so I do feel like if there are, I mean, this is what indigenous cultures like the Shipibo would say, that, these visionary and sacred plants are, spirits, or they have beings, on these other, other dimensional levels that communicate with us when we experience these plants, that we in the modern West clearly have no idea what we're doing right now. We're just like, because we just, we grew up in a desacralized culture where, yeah, we just tend to look at everything as a consumer opportunity. Most of us are kind of materialists, nihilists, and so it's like, it's kind of like, I mean, I like Hamilton Morris, but that was kind of like his attitude, and all of his stuff was kind of like, oh, this is just chemicals, and let's see what happens to our brain when we take these different chemical combinations and so on. So we've kind of completely created like a desacralized kind of idea around them. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so listen to this suggestion that I have over the years kind of given to people in regards to, their first trip, and specifically with like ayahuasca and psilocybin. I tell people basically, like, obviously there's no licenses for folks, but if you're going to do your first trip, I have this saying that be prepared to leave your job or leave your significant other, because whatever you see, you're not going to be able to unsee. And it's literally like the title of your first book, Breaking Open the Head. That's it. And I say that because that has happened to me and I've seen it happen to other people. And yeah, what do you think about that? One warning, that's all you get.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, people say, after you go to Burning Man, because a lot of people also take a lot of psychedelics, it's very intensified. Don't make any major life choices, 2 months until 2 months have passed.
Yeah,
And people, including myself, I married a woman that was a disaster who I met at Burning Man. So it's like, yeah, you have to be really careful about that. So yeah, same
I'm
thing with
living that right now. Don't worry.
yeah, same thing with these powerful experiences. Often they give you very correct intuitions, though.
Absolutely.
That you're like I have a friend who used to, I think he still does it. He would bring the CEOs of startups down to Peru to do ayahuasca for a few weeks. And then there would be follow-ups, and a lot of them would end up changing their jobs or like realizing that the company they were running was just kind of soulless and wasn't really helping the earth and so on, and then feeling kind of like they want to do something more significant or more helpful.
Yeah. Um, do you see the internet as a psychedelic tool, like a
Well, that's
digital
interesting.
psychedelic?
I mean, hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Do I see it as a psychedelic tool? I see the internet as a tool, just as I see psychedelics as tools. Um, the internet has been so many things. The tragedy of the internet. Well, it's a little bit like the tragedy of psychedelics that seems to be happening right now, where this,
Mm,
when the internet was introduced, there was a lot of idealism, and it was like, oh wow, this is going to liberate people, and everybody will have access to all the great knowledge and be able to do research and connect and build communities. And then ultimately it was sort of given over to private corporations. Even though we the taxpayers paid for the internet to be built, somehow it ended up in the hands of Bezos and Zuckerberg and these other people, and they weren't really forced, or Gates. They weren't really. They were just given it. Like, they weren't forced to give a certain percentage back to the people, even though we had actually we paid for the thing to be built.
yeah.
And so then we have now a privatized internet that is actually being used to spy on us and control our behavior and manipulate us and so on. So that's very unfortunate. So I'm a little concerned that the whole psychedelic thing could go the same route, because now with a sort of libertarian, it's very likely that psychedelics will be deregulated with the Trump presidency, with Elon Musk and RFK Jr. if they maintain their strong roles in it. And I don't even know. 20 years ago, 15 years ago, I've been like, wow, that's great. Deregulated psychedelics, access to everybody. Now I'm really not sure that's going to be so great, because what I even see with cannabis is like a lot of people in New York getting high all the time. And
Yeah.
it also feels like not like a good vibe. It doesn't feel like it's making life better somehow. That's just a large generalization. Of course, I don't want people to go to prison from it and so on. I could be totally wrong, but I'm a little bit concerned that the commodification of psychedelics, the commercialization of them, the patents that different companies will have for how they can be used in therapy, or which molecules can be used by what company, it's going to have the same impact that the privatization of the internet had on human consciousness, on the collective knowledge base.
Yeah, absolutely the same thing. And what's really interesting is that, the government had it so suppressed and like demonized at a certain point. And I feel like, wasn't psilocybin scheduled like higher than cocaine?
No, I think it's the same. Well, maybe. Psilocybin is still Schedule One,
Okay.
as is LSD and
Yeah.
DMT, which means that they're just drugs of abuse with no potential for positive use. So there's an effort to
Right.
get them rescheduled. The reason ketamine was the first substance to get released for general use legally was because I think it was a Schedule Three, because it had use in medical surgeries and so on, or whatever. So it was much easier to get it approved for medical use or for therapeutic use.
How do you feel about ketamine? What's your,
Well, I have
because it's
mixed
not
feelings.
necessarily the plant thing,
What's that?
like it's not necessarily just like ayahuasca is the root, psilocybin is the mushroom. So I know that there's different schools of thought where when you start to enter into, LSD and ketamine and kind of moving over into just, instead of just from the hands of God, so to speak, and now it's being moved around by the hands of man. Like some folks like, I'm not doing that, but I'll move into this. Like, where are you at with it?
So, I mean, if I'm just completely honest, which I tend to be,
Thank you.
I'm concerned that ketamine is doing this thing that I'm talking about around kind of eroding the
Mm,
boundary between the psychic and the physical, and that it's making people more. It can make people more weak and on a level of like a spiritual level, and make them more like allow like astral entities to come in. Having said that, although I don't use it a lot, like I don't use it like weekly or even monthly, I sometimes love it and have profound experiences. Particularly with close people, with lovers. Like I think it can be an incredible tool for discovering communication.
mm.
Yeah,
Along the lines of like MDMA, maybe? Like, can you talk a little bit about MDMA and like intimacy? And, that's the love drug. And, do you feel like it really does have the ability to deepen relationships and deepen emotional connections, just everything along the lines of that?
I think it certainly has those abilities. And one of the things that I really have found interesting with MDMA, it's also true of psilocybin, but I mean, I've had
Really?
experiences where, well, no, no,
I
no,
don't get how
not,
do you
not, let me get into what I'm saying. I've had experiences where friends who I did a journey with, that was just supposed to be fun, but they ended up dropping into a space and sharing like very profound things about traumatic events in their lives in a way that
Mm,
they only felt comfortable to share because of the MDMA. So I can really
mm,
see why it has such an incredible therapeutic use for trauma, post traumatic stress disorder, and so on. I think with relationships, you have to be a little careful with these things because they can be such amplifiers, and they can also kind
yeah,
of like take you to kind of like a fake thing, or like you feel like incredibly close to somebody or incredibly in love with somebody, then you come out of it and you still have this, feeling that you're incredibly loved, but actually, love, I mean, there's that falling in love which can happen, but to really know if you're compatible with somebody is a much more of an incremental process, and
yes.
so a lot of times people get very disappointed because they have this huge love, they come together, they get married, who knows what happens, and then they realize, eventually that that wasn't really the person for them, and that the high, the euphoria of the drug connection masked other incompatibilities that they didn't recognize because they just
Mm,
leapt into this, almost like telepathic union.
yeah, yeah. I
By the
mean,
way, in
that's
terms of telepathy, I was just listening today to this thing. It's a podcast, the telepathy tapes. Super
okay.
fascinating. You and your viewers might be interested. So
Yeah.
essentially, they're looking at kids with extreme autism who apparently have like incredibly powerful telepathy with their parents. And they did studies with scientists, like the kids in one area, the parents in another. The parents like think of something or write something down, and it's like over 90% accuracy rate. Um, Pretty
I
crazy.
could believe that.
Yeah.
I could believe that, because I have a cousin that has Asperger's, and I don't know, about like 10 years or so ago, I was visiting them in the deep south, and I had like a pretty high amount of cannabis. I think it was maybe an edible or something. You know that there's these different levels, obviously, of cannabis, to where I feel like a lot of times when people feel that paranoia, it can actually be merited, and it could actually be, in my case, it was never paranoia, and maybe because I'm a little bit more maybe tapped in with myself, but I end up seeing it as more of a clairvoyance, of things that are happening, things that are about to happen, and I've seen them come true. But in the case of my cousin with Asperger's, so I am completely up there, and the way that he operates, with his headspace is that he can't really make direct eye contact. He can't really tap in with folks. And so a lot of times he'll kind of chatter to himself. It's a big room of friends and family, and it's very fast, and it's a certain cadence to where you really can't understand what he's saying. And for some reason, I was able to hear this completely clearly. And while he's walking and pacing, super busy pacing, just going back and forth, I started answering him, but not looking directly at him. And because of how he's moved through, his childhood and life, with Asperger's, I don't think anyone ever really heard him. And so he's like, "Wait, did you hear me? You hear me?" I said, "Yeah, I hear what you're saying." And he's like, "Okay, well, because he was talking about church because it was Sunday, and they wanted to go to church. He's like, I don't know if I want to go to church, but am I agnostic? But I think I should love Jesus. And he's literally working out all of this stuff. And what I realized is that everything he's saying is from his actual inside of his head, and he doesn't have a filter. It's a subconscious in a way, because he can talk directly with you, but in that subconscious way, it's outside and it seems like it's completely involuntary. And so as I'm having this chatter with him, he's like, okay, well, you can hear me. So are you going to be able to help me? I'm like, whoa, not too sure about that, but I'll be able to tap in with you as much as possible. And so I tried to, over the years, just use that as a tool, when we're in the same space, to be able to tap in with him. And so I think that, that's the one thing, besides everything else for cannabis, that has been really helpful and very interesting to see that, this spectrum that they speak of, that this plant allowed me to kind of move over into his spectrum, to where like he can't necessarily come to our spectrum. I kind of got to that space, and I thought that was
totally
really
makes
cool.
sense.
Yeah. I thought that was super, super, super cool. So stoned ape theory, what are your thoughts on that? And for people that aren't familiar, stoned ape theory is from McKenna, right? Terrence McKenna. Yeah, from Terrence McKenna. That psychedelics and specific mushrooms on the ground, apes are taking them, and over time, that is instrumental in human consciousness. What are your thoughts on that?
Possible.
Yeah.
I don't know how you verify that.
Yeah. I know, because there's a lot of people around that's just acting like apes and they're human. So not too sure.
Yeah.
Not too sure if it kind of got into everyone. Before I get on my Instagram and kind of pop over to some of the things that I sent you from some of your amazing posts on your IG.
Yeah.
Had a question about human evolution and singularity. Really, singularity. What are your thoughts on singularity? Because you've spoken about, humanity reaching a new level of consciousness. And do you see singularity as like a technological milestone, or could it also improve like spiritual evolution facilitated by psychedelics?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I have a bunch of thoughts about that. I mean, I'm not that thrilled with this sort of linear, one-dimensional technological singularity idea that the destiny of humans is to kind of merge with machines, or that actually we're just like a transition to artificial superintelligence or whatever. And part of the reason I'm not thrilled by that is through my experiences with different indigenous cultures like the Kogi and the Shipibo and the Sequoia, in that what I seem to understand from those experiences, from talking to other people who've worked with them, or those guys themselves, is I just think there's a lot of there's like a multidimensional cosmos that we can access through nature, that includes exploring many levels of dimensions of consciousness, or through the body. I recently watched this. I also recommend this incredible new documentary on something called Tukdam. It's Tukdam Between Worlds. So essentially, these Tibetan monks who've meditated their whole lives, when they're going to die, they know they're going to die. They ask to be kind of sequestered, or they're back at home. And when they die, they maintain their posture. They stay in an upright lotus position, and their bodies don't decay, even though they're no longer breathing and their heart isn't beating, for days, weeks. I think the longest one was like 36 days. And in the documentary, they have these sort of scientists come and measure their skin, and measure the where they're at. And according to the Tibetans, these guys are still staying in this very subtle level of like enlightened consciousness, and they're not really supposed to disturb them too much, because while they're in that state, they're actually choosing like their next incarnation. They're kind of like just consciously in sort of between worlds, I guess. So I think we don't know enough about what our human consciousness is capable of, and just to give that up and say, okay, now we're going to merge with machines, it's I don't trust it. And I feel the sort of binary, on off consciousness of the machine realm and the engineering realm, it's very flat. And yeah, like actually the sort of analog realm of crystals and plants and and people, there's a lot of more depth there. So I'm a little bit afraid that we're actually rushing to kind of like forfeit what could be a much more exciting discovery. That like if the frontier of human fascination moved from just like technological and material progress to kind of really understanding what we're capable of as we explore the sort of depth dimensions of the psyche, that would be a much more exciting vision of a future for humanity, and would get us out of this cul-de-sac that we're sort of in now, where people were living in this kind of flat world. You have, on the one hand, you have skeptics and materialists, engineers who believe that the singularity, the transhumanism is the way to go. They want to get us to Mars, but it really doesn't, in a way, have much of a why to it. And then on the other hand, you have Christian and Islam. You have religious people who have just accepted these dogma of these ancient religious texts and base their whole lives around how they choose to interpret something that was written, 2,000, 1,500 years ago. So I think there's another option, and that's what I'm trying to think about for my next book, which is like, quantum physics is showing us that consciousness is much more embedded in the physical reality than we ever thought. And that actually consciousness might be the foundation of what we experience as reality, and that this gives us something, like a new way of going forward that could be much more healing and much more profound. And so yeah, I mean, I like there's a guy, Tom Roberts, who wrote a book called The Psychedelic Future of the Mind. He's like an older academic guy, but his idea is that instead of a technological singularity, we could think about a neuro singularity, where we use like everything that we're, and it's not a question of like being a Luddite and destroying all the technologies, but like we're learning so much about, the kind of brain waves, alpha, theta, how memory works, how to show, dreams, experiments like the Imperial College experiments with extended state DMT. Like, what if we put all of our energies into, or a lot of our energies into, really going deeper into this realm of the psychocosmos? It's much less destructive. So at the moment, our focus on material accumulation and consumerism is really destroying the planet at a very fast rate. So it would be a less destructive, more interesting approach to reality.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I had my first. I guess I'd say I reconciled with the future of singularity. Actually, during the pandemic, I was in California, and I don't know, I came across some more chocolates, and I'm in the shower, and it was just something like, okay, singularity, like, just get ready. Like, it is what it is. It is what it is. And it's been this way before, which I thought was really interesting. And this thought came to mind. And it was just something that I felt like I was just accepting. Cause I think, like, you brought up the word like Luddite. Like I have this weird dichotomy of like wanting to be a Luddite and just throw it all away and just, dig into past the subway tunnels and get to the core of the earth, like I mentioned earlier. But then obviously saying, okay, Alexa, turn this off, or, Waymo and, the self-driving cars and things like this. But I think what you're saying is absolutely true. Like, it's more about of a psychonautic type of situation. With that being said, like, do you think, like, about the origins of psychedelic compounds? Like, some people argue, like, DMT, psilocybin was introduced to Earth by the extraterrestrial. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I definitely, particularly in my second book, that was really my effort to look at things in a very like prophetic and cosmological way. It feels like we're in like a cosmic fable in some way. I mean, even like Trump winning, and kind of like the number of really improbable things that keep happening, or the
It was
discovery
such
of
a landslide, though.
What's that? It was not a landslide.
I
No,
said it was such a landslide. That was
it
so
actually
funny.
wasn't such a landslide. When you look at the final numbers, he won by
Really?
very few votes. And there's also
Mm.
some questions around. I mean, I won't get into it, but what whether the right wing has often accused the Democrats of things that they actually do themselves. So whether the vote was actually tabulated, whether anyway, we can get
Republicans.
what's that?
Republicans.
Yeah, exactly. When you threw me off my riff there for a second. Oh yeah, no, just like if you look at like the discovery of LSD, right at the time of the finding solution in Europe, and the right around the time of the nuclear holocaust, the nuclear bombs and so on. So it just feels like the discovery of consciousness, the unfolding of consciousness somehow does to me, when I'm in a good mood, seem like it's somehow like it's like a cosmic unfolding. Like we think that we're somehow separate from nature, but what if we're just part of nature on a bigger process? And if you look at how nature works, processes are exquisitely timed, right? So like a fetus is developing in the womb, and like at this date, it gets a signal to start like moving its arms or using its feet or something, or opening getting its nervous system organized or whatever. So maybe actually like we've gone from being these little tribal societies. We connected the earth through like roads and satellites and fiber optics. Like it almost feels like we're somehow moving towards kind of like an awakening as a planetary consciousness, even though at the moment we're seeing more the negative or the darker aspects of that. It could still turn out to be an unanticipated miracle, like birth itself.
So you're saying we still have hope here on Earth?
Yeah, I mean, tonight I'm saying that. Sometimes I don't feel that way at all. But when I look at the climate data and the ecological data, I feel very, very concerned that we've really past the point of no return. But and
Yeah.
then when I look at the people who are taking over the world, who are authoritarians, who are sort of criminal cartels and so on, it looks very worrisome. But yeah, we've always we'll see what happens. What else can we do?
Literally see what happens. Literally see what happens. Totally just close your eyes and close your eyes and just cross your fingers,
Yeah, that's all
and
we can do right now. Yeah.
that's all we can do. Oh my gosh. All right, so let's hop into some of the things that I saved because I think that these are just some really cool thought-provoking things. So a couple of things I just wanted you to kind of riff a little bit more off of, and I think that's what's so cool about this, where it's almost a selfish pursuit where I want to just interview people and have them to continue on whatever it is that the rant they had to cut off because it's more than a certain amount of characters or enough space is enough space on there. But let us see here. What do we have here? Ba, 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 ba. Oh wow, this is a really interesting one. The work of assassination, for such it is, will soon reach its end. As the voice of the poet becomes stifled, history loses its meaning, and the eschatological promise bursts like. Did I say it? What? Did I do it?
Eschatological.
All right, eschatological promise bursts like a new and frightening dawn upon the consciousness of man. Only now, at the edge of the precipice, it is possible to realize that everything we are taught is false. And that's a quote from Henry Miller, but you posted that earlier this summer. And, we're obviously talking a little bit about politics here. And I think of assassination attempts and the people that are taking over the world, so to speak, and what that looks like. So go. What are your...
Hold on a second. I'm going back to find the quote again. Hold on 1 second here.
Okay, July 3rd.
Can you look
that was the latest essay. Looks at Arthur Rimbaud, infamous poet who stopped writing at age of 19. And that is the quote.
I love Rimbaud. Absolutely. Let me see.
But yeah, so are you saying like assassination is canceled or
well, I wasn't really talking about hold on 1 second. The work of assassination, for such as it is, will soon reach its end. I wasn't talking about anything to do with the Trump assassination.
Well, not necessarily Trump, but just in general with assassination, where like in what aspect are you connecting to this, in which why you posted it? That's pretty strong.
Um, I guess I was more thinking about the dangers of, kind of like the assassination of artists, or um, the voice of the poet becomes stifled. History loses its meaning. I mean, I was thinking a little bit about people like Garcia Lorca, who was, killed under like Franco's regime in the 30s, or basically that, in a modern industrial technological society, artists tend to be more the voice of the romantic vision, like Rimbaud, and they either go crazy or they go silent, or they can't persist or survive in a culture that feels very alien to them. Um, yeah, I think that's it. I love Henry Miller. This was a bit of a thick quote. I'm surprised you busted this one out on me. History loses meaning.
I know that's
Eschatological promise is like, like, is there a purpose to our world? Is there a purpose to history? Is it just chaos and randomness and the strongman rules, or is there a deeper possibility or promise underlying that? And and is that something exciting or frightening or both? Um, and only now at the edge of the precipice is it possible to realize that everything we are taught is false. Yeah, and I think that still really rings true. I mean, I'm saying that, most of us grew up in a culture of materialist atheism, or kind of a fundamentalist, Christianity or Islam, and those were all ways of controlling behavior and controlling consciousness. But maybe the truth is something else, that as we access it, actually helps us to liberate ourselves. To recognize that there are these multi dimensions, and you can have direct experience of them, and there are forces in the universe, spirits and demons and angels, and the soul does continue beyond death, and how what we do in this life actually influences the trajectory of our soul and spirit in future lives. For most people, that's so far away from what they feel allowed to believe, but I think in our deep in our hearts, we know that's all true in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely in the soul. Next quote. All right, this one's from Rudolf Steiner. The soul will be made non-existent with the aid of a drug. People will invent a vaccine to influence the organism as early as possible, preferably as soon as it is born, so that this human body never even gets the idea that there is a soul and a spirit. So, speaking exactly to what you were saying, like people can feel it, but Steiner is arguing that we're trying to completely just dull that mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, this quote was jumped on by anti-vax communities of kind of like, psychics, mediums, spiritual type people, ayahuasca type people. And I don't know. I mean, I've ended up, I've had to, like a lot of people, gone through a long journey around the vaccines.
Yeah.
That journey is not even done, to be honest. But I mean, I ended up doing the
Oh.
Johnson and Johnson one, which because it didn't have the mRNA in it. But I
Right.
do think that for older people, the vaccines were probably good, and even indigenous cultures in the Amazon who are very susceptible to COVID, like they all got vaccinated. I mean, so I don't think it's. I think what he means by vaccine here is not exactly like the COVID vaccine, but
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah. But I think it's important to clarify that because there's so much, particularly, and in fact, I find it very scary that we may turn over the government's health department to RFK Jr., who I was really excited about him until I interviewed him and also read his book very closely, and then I began to feel there was a lot of kookishness and sort of demagoguery in his thinking, and that I don't really trust him. And I actually personally think that vaccines like for polio and smallpox and all that stuff, measles, were great advances for modern medicine, and this idea that we're going to make all those optional is probably going to lead to a lot of people suffering and dying. And it's also going to be, if we have another pandemic, like the bird flu pandemic comes along in the next 4 years, I'm very concerned about how America will be unable to coordinate any kind of effective response because there's so much rhetoric around it right now.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, so on the other hand, I think that, Steiner was saying that the, Western science, Western medicine, we're kind of positing an approach to life that does kind of like make it impossible to inhabit a spiritual world or conceive of a spiritual world. And I think that's partially true also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Let's see. Next one. Hmm. No, it's funny. I have bookmarked Burning Man's performative rebellion. No, it's like, I mean, obviously everyone is not a burner, so it's like if you have that experience. I didn't go this past year, but I was there. I actually chef for my camp. The year of the Muddy Burn,
Uh-huh.
which was quite interesting, and I feel like, a lot of the OG burners said to me like, "Hey, this is actually the best burn that it's been in a long time because it's kind of back to a lot of what the tenets were, and just sharing, being together, surviving, living in this, construction that we did." But I feel like it had become a little bit too comfortable, in a way that negated really what the spirit of Burning Man was, and so it took like a natural disaster, so to speak, to get people to really get back to that. I also heard that people argue that the Renegade Burn in 2021, I went to that one too, actually. Interesting that one also was more aligned with the spirit of burn. Did you go to either one of those, and like what are your thoughts on those, or just like burn in general, where it's going? Because obviously, you wrote a Substack about it, so wondering what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, I went 18 times.
Oh,
I started going in like the first time I went, maybe it was 2000, and I had an
okay.
assignment from Rolling Stone, so that was a really exciting way to go because I got to interview everybody, and I was really amazed by it, and didn't really realize there was such a incredible psychedelic culture happening on the West Coast and so on. And then I went back and I started to give talks, and a lot of people were interested in my work there and so on. And then I don't know, I began to lose interest a little bit. I mean, I feel like it became a little bit of a simulation of itself, or kind of imitation of itself, and
Mm,
more and more, it's like, instead of it feeling like a place where people were being very like spontaneous and trying new things in a very earnest way, it began to feel that people were just copying. They would see the outfits, and they would go to Etsy and buy the exact outfits, the same hats as everybody else, and it became like a social class thing too, where it's like, if you're in the know, you're going to be at like Robot Hard at 5 a.m. by the trash fence,
for the
and
sunrise set, yeah.
it just really felt like it became, Terrence McKenna, to bring it up, said that culture is our enemy, and because once things become a culture, they've kind of like solidified and crystallized, and the original spontaneous essence and charisma is kind of gone. So I feel with Burning Man at a certain point, yeah, it became a culture in a way, almost like a cult, or a minor religion or something. I still may go back at some point soon, just because I see a lot of people out there that I know, and after all those years and so on. But for me, the magic of that kind of festival has moved to other festivals and other events, smaller ones or more intimate ones. But I mean, I was very excited about it, and still am, because I think it shows you how adaptable people are to like changing their behaviors, or the idea of like a social sculpture. So you go to Burning Man and it's like leave no trace, gift economy, everyone's a performer. And so, anybody who goes into Burning Man, they could be like a really, they could be like a corporate lawyer, high class sociopath, but suddenly they'll be hugging everybody, giving away their drugs, because that's also how you build status, in that community. It's about how you treat your other people and how you are in the community. So I think it, instilled some good values, but it didn't really go far enough. It ended up being more about, um, yeah, like money still has a huge role there, even though there's, you don't use money when you go there, but the rich people are the ones who just decide, the big art cars, like the $1 million art cars, the $1 million camps.
The
There's a lot of
RVs.
status there. It's like it ended up taking all of the status stuff from like Saint Tropez, or like the different Ibiza or whatever, and like transposing it there in a way.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like the status out there is built on like if you have an RV, what type of RV that you have and how kitted out is it? And, then the next level is, okay, do you have Starlink, which I think is literally the bane of our burn existence and definitely shouldn't be out here. But I think that's something, again, that is inevitable and we can't unsee. And the people that are going to lean into it, you make a
Well,
choice
it's not.
now.
It's not necessarily inevitable. I mean, you could, it's a social sculpture. You could create rules. I mean, when I first went, there was no cell phone service, and that was amazing. That was so much better because you would
Yeah.
really just have to get lost. Like if you lost your friends or lost your camp, you would just have to find other people, and you would have like, could have surf a whole other reality.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think in a way, like Instagram and cell phones had as they've had a negative effect in a lot of areas of life, had a very negative effect on Burning Man.
Yeah.
And then it all, it's like everything just becomes like, in a way, like, instead of yachts, rich people build art cars and show off their, power and aesthetics and so on.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's still cool. I suppose I'm not really that interested at this point. I'm sort of trying to figure out what the next thing is. I don't know.
Any ideas? Any thoughts? Let's speak like quietly about it because then it'll become something else. But
Exactly. Maybe I'll tell you offline.
okay, thanks. Oh man, next up, let's hop a little bit back into politics. I know when I messaged you about this, I'm like, let's just talk about psychedelics and things, but it is inevitable well, not inevitable, but we're so close to, what are we, like, less than a month out, from this, huge pivotal election. And you made a quote actually on July 4th. Um, the president, like the king, represents as archetype our inner lives, the core of our personalities. The feeble-minded president must reveal on some level our individual as well as collective failure of resolve, willpower, intellect, cunning, feeling, and courage. We've let things slide way too far. So that was an essay that you wrote on the archetype of the feeble-minded king president and looking at the myth of the Fisher King Grail. So that was July 4th. A lot of things.
That was actually more thinking about Biden when he wasn't yet leaving the race.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know. But with that being said, like, now that we have a new king, so to speak, how are you thinking about the archetype of this king representing us?
Um,
Because other people say, like, oh, we're getting the president that we deserve.
yeah. Well, we certainly are. He definitely seems to represent. I mean, there's so many different ways to look at it right now, and I have been, writing about it in an ongoing fashion. I got really interested in internal family systems. This guy Robert Falconer wrote a book called "The Others Within Us."
What's that?
Really worth reading. It's amazing. So he also began to look at like spirit possession and basically that that he argues that we have other selves within us that are like spirits, and there's another book about internal family systems called "There's No Bad Parts," but so we have all these different parts within us, and some of those parts, over the course of civilization over the last like hundreds years, we were kind of like we've suppressed or pushed down or kind of like sort of tried to wallpaper over, like our racist parts, our misogynist parts, and our, violent parts, and so on. And unfortunately, I think what Trump has done is he's kind of allowed those parts to come up, those parts that were sort of, civilization had tried to suppress in America to a certain extent. So now he's like given those free reign, and now they're out. And what do we do? I mean, according to internal family systems, they have to be witnessed, they have to be, in a way, loved, and they have to be brought back under, control. I mean, according to Falconer, there's also within all these parts that are within us that we don't always recognize as separate selves. There's also a, kind of self that is a sort of all-knowing, more compassionate kind of source of the being of the individual. And so, how do we put that one back in charge again? At the moment, we have no idea how to do that. We don't know what it's going to take to do that. I mean, the last few days I've been reading a book by Kevin Roberts, who's the director of the Heritage Foundation. And also I did that Curtis Yarvin interview that you mentioned, because he's one of the philosophers of like the Dark Enlightenment or the neo-reactionary movement, who basically thinks that the US should be run like a tech corporation with a dictator CEO in charge. which I completely disagree with. But Kevin Roberts is a Catholic from Louisiana, coming from a broken home, and he basically, I mean, he's wants a nationwide abortion ban. He wants to make contraception illegal. He believes that doing these things is going to force us back into family values, like the sort of traditional family structure. People have like big families, but also he wants public prayer. He wants to basically turn us into a Christian nation, where the working class is re-empowered, and but it's all about these piety and these values. And a lot of it I completely disagree with utterly, but I do kind of feel there are areas where I slightly do agree with him, which is like I do feel that like we've been a society without a soul. And like that's like when I wrote Breaking Open the Head, I had this deep yearning for meaning, and I felt that in the sort of modern liberal secular humanism that basically is very atheistic and cynical or nihilistic, there really wasn't anything to hold on to, no real reason to hope for anything in a weird way. Like if life is just this flash, and and so I feel that he feels that, and there's he's built this whole bulwark around Catholicism and Christianity, but for me, there's this other path to transcendence, which is not psychedelics in themselves, but really our capacity to have these direct experiences that reveal that there's actually a unified field of consciousness of which we're all parts of. And from there, I think we could, like reinvent a social system that makes sense. But I don't think just grabbing onto Christianity and imposing that on everybody is going to be a healthy thing. That could lead to a type of like Christian nationalist fascism. But I certainly wouldn't want to live under that. And I don't think most people in the blue states certainly are going to want to live under that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's absolutely like untenable. And I have this like odd thought that the only way that we will come together, idealistic thoughts, oh, world peace, world peace, world peace. The only way that we would remotely have anything like that is if some extraterrestrial being came down that was other, and then it's us against them. Kind of like how the movies are, because we think about world peace, but we see every day
Yeah.
we are divided
Yeah,
by religion.
I have a different perspective on that. I feel like
Okay.
because I in the book 2012, my second book, I wrote a lot about like crop circles, these patterns that appear in England, and I do think that I know this is going to sound crazy for some people, but that there could actually be a communication happening between us, and there might be extraterrestrial or extra dimensional other forms of consciousness in the universe are trying to communicate with us. But I think the point is that we actually have to figure it out on our own before we get to meet anything and have like healthy contact with others, forms of consciousness in the universe, like in that sense. So
Okay. So is that? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
no. So it's like even though it seems impossible, we have to somehow solve this quadratic equation for ourselves, and then maybe we get to meet like the Galactic Federation or whatever.
Okay. So is that a vetting done by them, so to speak? Like, oh, okay, all right, they've hit a couple KPIs, a couple benchmarks. Okay, we can send some folks over to Earth and kind of get it going. Or is it something to where we're more maybe on like a frequency level to where we just end up connecting in that way? And it just by, when you meet someone, you're like, man, gosh, it seems like I've known you like all my life. Like we just hit that level and that frequency in which it just kind of happens. Or is it all right, here we come.
I think it's that's beautiful. I mean, I don't know. I like both of those, and that was very well expressed. Yeah, I mean, it could partially be a frequency thing. Like if we can hold kind of the paradoxical, multidimensional nature of reality, within ourselves, then maybe we're up to the challenge of having intentional communication with beings that are very like and very unlike ourselves.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's funny you said that was a beautiful way to express. I'm thinking in my head like, oh, I think the Jedi mind strips are kind of like kicking in.
There you go.
It's been a little while. Okay, I think I got one more. And this kind of dovetails into what we've been talking about. Modern civilization values what can be quantified, verified, and utilized. Soul and spirit do not fall into these categories, although the new revelations of quantum physics revealing consciousness as foundational support the occult shamanic world view. So that's another from an essay about we're born with souls, but in another sense, we have to make them.
What's the question? That's it.
Oh, you're like, no, that's it, actually. Yeah, I kind of agree, because I was just speaking with a friend today where I said, like, hey, you're not meant to make it out alive.
Yeah.
And I say that in the sense where you're meant to have these peaks and valleys and these revelations and these meanings, and yeah, it's not meant to be quantified, verified, or utilized. So I guess my question is, are these the things that we need to kind of check off on this like intergalactic KPI for us to get like a little bit of visitors, a little bit of action over here?
Well, I think that we've already had visitors in action.
Well, yeah, I was thinking
Okay.
it as I was saying, like, okay, yeah, it's
Yeah.
been stuff, but more so, I guess, in the profound sense to where, I mean, this is really far out there, but there is some sort of like integration in between these species or this species with what we have going on. Are we even like, built for that? Or are we just so kind of low on the totem pole of just development that, again, we don't even make the mark collectively as a society because we're just kind of cutting loose? And then other people have theories that, all right, we were kind of dropped here to see what happens. And this is all just a simulation, so to speak.
That's a lot of different ideas. I mean,
I know it's the Jedi mind ships
yeah.
coming out. Let's go.
I mean, we don't really know. So there's lots of different ways we can like, think about things. I mean, as I said, like what I really like to do, and maybe for people who are just listening to me, yabber on for the first time, maybe they'll think that I'm totally out of my mind, which does happen. But in my mind,
Great.
I try to be very clear between like, I've had certain like paranormal and psychic and telepathic and synchronistic experiences. And like, okay, those to me really demonstrated that the universe is different than the old kind of Newtonian materialist worldview. And then other things from there, it's like a stretch. It's like, yeah, I don't actually can't say that I know. I mean, I can say that I resonate or find a lot of let's see, certain sets of ideas make a lot of sense to me. That for many people might be very wacky, like Rudolf Steiner, who we mentioned before. His whole esoteric worldview. He had a movement called anthroposophy, and he was somebody who had like all this like clairvoyance as a child and could see these other worlds and stuff. But he then realized nobody else had this ability around him, so he got a doctorate in philosophy and became like a respectable kind of philosopher. And then he waited till he was 40 to start sharing about his own experiences. But yeah, so his view is that kind of as I said, like if we look at nature is so intentional. Like if a fetus is developing in the womb, I mean how precise that the one-celled organism is guided to form all these organs and shape itself and then develop a mind and have the nervous system organized and then like come out into this world. Could it be that we're actually something like a the caterpillar to butterfly metaphor is often used. Like, is it like, are we something like a caterpillar that's in a chrysalis, and at this stage we're like tearing apart our environment, we're consuming, kind of like a caterpillar consumes like everything in the chrysalis before it escapes, and it becomes something much more beautiful and amazing. So like, is there something ahead that we can't really, it's a state change, it's transmutation. So it's not something we can like fully explain from this level of being, but you can experience it directly, in ayahuasca or DMT sometimes or whatever, that there are these dimensions or levels of consciousness. And yeah, we have just as much. We're not just dropped here. We're not. We're I would say we live in a universe of meaning, and we're an aspect of that universe, creating meaning and exploring meaning, and living in a meaningful way, and that somehow for Steiner, like the Earth is built in such a way so that humanity comes out of it, and that we have a role to transform the Earth, to steward the Earth, and we kind of lost sense of our role in this little period where we kind of we got kind of over focused on science and like the sort of masculine rational part of the brain, and so if we're going to survive as a species, we have to come back into balance and use the gains that we've made over the last hundreds of years in terms of how to manipulate matter and learn how to use energies and so on, but then reorient that to a more holistic way of being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Or I could be totally wrong, and we're just this is it. We're like going down in flames, which is completely reasonable from where we're at now too.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Be nice to everybody. All right. Last question. I'm gonna swing it back into the psychedelic realm, just because obviously that's the basis of how I got to know about you and your work. And yeah, that's one of the things that I really want everyone listening, viewing, etc., to be able to take away just some different notes on how to either continue or evolve their psychedelic journey. With you mentioned culture, so it's interesting. I'm going to ask this. Psychedelic pop culture. If you could recommend a single movie, book, it can't be your book. I want you to don't say your book. I know. Recommend a single movie, book, or song that best captures the essence of a psychedelic experience. What would it be and why?
Yeah.
Oh, he's thinking. That's a good one. You got quiet for a second. I love that. Got to ponder this one. Finishing strong.
No, I mean, there's there's a lot of different movies that come
Oh,
to
it
mind.
just
I
came
mean,
from the heart. It's something, and you're like, maybe not that one. What was it?
well, the two movies that leapt to mind were Everything Everywhere All at Once
Okay.
and Holy Mountain by Jodorowsky.
I didn't see that one. Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So why that one, since I'm familiar with the other one?
Jodorowsky. Well, that was a very famous film. It was funded by the Beatles, and then it was like the scandal of the Cannes Film Festival in like 1973 or something, and then they took it out of distribution, so nobody could see it for like 30 years. But it was like a very famous sort of art film, mostly shot in Mexico, I think. Yeah, it's about sort of alchemy and the quest for transcendence, and kind of like the sort of bloody pageant of history, and there's all these like sort of they get together. They're like the most powerful, wealthiest people in the world. So all of these like companies that are kind of exploiting people in huge numbers, and they all decide they want to find enlightenment, and so they all come together. They visit this guru, and he takes them to the holy mountain. Yeah, it's a powerful film. It's its own kind of like totem or something. I actually ended up Jodorowsky. I think he's like 97 or something now, but we shot a documentary together on YouTube. People can watch it. We ended up walking around Paris for a day, and he's a famous tarot card reader. He read my tarot cards. He invented something called psychomagic, which is kind of Jungian Gestalt kind of approach to psychology, where he has people reenact powerful events that so I mean that's one that leapt to mind. Yeah.
Okay, that one sounds really good.
Yeah.
And I mean, with that being said, I feel like we have, well, you have left us with quite a lot of homework. There have been a lot of books, essays, film. Everyone, you have your marching orders, and
Yeah,
of
well, hopefully
course,
people will also join my Substack, danielpinchbeck.substack.com, because it's an ongoing inquiry into all these topics and even more that we didn't mention.
Yeah, absolutely. So Substack,
YouTube, you
the
mentioned. Yeah.
Liminal, it's called
Liminal.news is the course platform. Yeah. Yeah.
Liminal News. You have YouTube, and of course, Instagram to get tiny bites of what's inside of Daniel Pinchbeck's broken head.
Thank you, Lynette. It's been really lovely to spend this time with you. I hope we get a chance to hang out again soon.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.